You're listening to the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast, the leading resource for real estate investors who want to dominate their market online. Dan Barrett is the founder of AdWords Nerds, a high-tech digital agency focusing exclusively on helping real estate investors like you get more leads and deals online, outsmart your competition, and live a freer, more awesome life. And now, your host, Dan Barrett.
All right, I am here with Joe Cordes. He is from Comax Properties. You can find them at We Buy Houses Fast, longisland.com. Joe, how are you, man? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing good, Dan. Glad to finally speak to you. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, sorry. I know we were trying to schedule this, and then we kind of got trapped in the holidays and all this stuff. So I'm glad we were able to finally jump on the phone. So, Joe, why don't we start kind of at the beginning? Now, you're an investor. You're out in Long Island. You're doing a whole bunch of different things out there, and it seems like you've got a pretty nice investing business kind of humming along. But how did you kind of get into real estate investing in the first place? Like, what was your introduction to that whole industry?
It actually goes back a while. When I was about maybe 23 or 24 years old, me and my brother had bought a two-family house. My father was a New York City firefighter, and he was always looking for an investment. And him and my mother had saved up some money, and they bought a two-family house. And they were like, this is really good. And even at that young age, my parents kind of were explaining like about depreciation. And, my father had a friend who done very well in real estate. So back then, I had former life in law enforcement in the NYPD. And I went on that job when I was 20 years old. So me and my brother were living at home. We had a pretty good income back then. He was also a police officer. And we kind of were banking money. We were working a lot back then. It was, the mid-'80s in New York. It was very busy. And we kind of had some cash. So we're like, you know what, let's go in together and buy an investment property. And we did that. And in our minds back then, that was really going to be the first of many, I had read Trump's book back then, The Art of the Deal. It was like right around that time. And like, I was really fired up about it. And that was always kind of the plan. And then what ended up happening when we kind of went out to kind of trying to leverage that property, we started to there was like a little bit of a recession at the time, and credit was very difficult to get, and it was also the knowledge base. Like I was going to Citibank looking to fund I was going like a regular bank, to try to get funding. And they were just like, you're not even close. Like you got to build a lot more equity up in this property. And we kind of had a couple of starts and fails, and then we kind of stopped, me and my brother. And at the same time, kind of like my career in law enforcement was going, I was studying for promotional exams, and the real estate thing kind of was on the back burner for like 10 years. And then I started to kind of always have a hand in it. I was looking at a house, I'd make an offer, but it was very kind of sporadic. And then when I kind of got near the end of the career, like kind of 20 years later, I always had this thing, like I wanted to kind of get back into real estate, but I left kind of law enforcement. I took a job in Manhattan, kind of suit and tie, get on a train every day kind of job, which was a rude awakening for me, having lived in my former life where I never had to really do that. And I hated it. I did it for 2 years and I was miserable. And I, stood on a train platform every day in my suit, just kind of thinking about jumping every time a train was coming in, And I had young kids and I was working a lot of hours, and I had always worked a lot of hours and kind of in law enforcement, and I was newly married and had young kids, and I'm just like, I'm not getting any younger, and I just kind of made this decision then to pull the plug and bail, and do real estate, and I kind of just made that decision very quickly and just did it, and kind of, as they say, burned the boats and just jumped in. I mean, that was about 5 years ago.
Wow. I mean, so first of all, I know
I rambled on for a while there.
So first of all, your family is freaking badass because you're like New York City Fire Department. Your dad is in the fire department, and both you and your brother were police officers. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, actually, my third brother was too. All three of us. Yeah.
Wow, so, that is amazing. So that is amazing in and of itself. I want to kind of I'm so curious because I think so many people today, myself included, right? Like really take for granted the fact that there is so much information about real estate investing that you can get right? I mean, you can go on Bigger Pockets, you can go wherever, you can get like 1,000,001 people that are going to tell you, 9 different ways you can go find properties and get funding and all that stuff. I think, what was interesting to me about that story is like, you guys are kind of going out, your dad had like kind of some connection to the real estate thing, but how are you getting your information on like how to do it? Like, were you doing mail order stuff to get that information? Was it just like you're going out and figuring it out by just trying to do it and, people turning you down? Like, how are you getting the direction, back when you originally got started?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I glossed over that too. And now that you brought that up, it makes me actually think back on it too, right? Because there's no web. Like I bought that first house in 1988, so there's no internet, there's no cell phones, there's no email, there's no texts. It's mail order and books, right? And so I read The Art of the Deal. That's not going to teach me how to buy single family houses and 2-family houses in Queens, New York, where I bought my first house. That's written by, a guy, you know who he is.
Yeah,
and he was big
I've
then.
Heard of him. I don't know. I've heard of him.
You heard of the guy. Yeah. And, he was riding high then, and so that really wasn't teaching him anything. It was just more of like an inspirational type thing, or like, look at this guy. He was able to do it, So you had that. And then I read a couple of books. It was almost like my father had one friend, and he had 4-family houses in Brooklyn, and it kind of took off on him. And he became a millionaire like within 2 years on these properties. And he was a guy like my father would call him up, but he wasn't certainly a person who was a mentor or someone I could call. So you're absolutely right. We stumbled along and just tried to figure it out. Like, I'm one of those people, like, if someone knows something, I'm always like the dumbest guy in the room. I'm like, I will chew their ear off for the party till they have to like fake a seizure to get away from me. I'm like, my wife sometimes rolling her eyes, like, let this poor guy go. I'm like, no, he knows things. This guy knows things.
Well, that's the way you want to be, right? I mean, that's like I always say, like, you want to be like not the smartest person in any room that you're in, right?
Right.
Because that's such a huge advantage. I think a lot of people are just afraid to ask. They're afraid to ask people, right? Like, how did you do that? I think that's kind of a big advantage.
Yeah. So that's what I would do. I would ask people. But you're right. I read a couple of books. They weren't great. Unfortunately, unfortunately is what it is. New York's just a different animal sometimes. So the books that I would read, or the things that I would read, unless they were like a person who was operating regionally here in New York or Long Island, it was a different thing. You know what I'm saying? And that's one of kind of the big things in New York is everything is really overshadowed by the fact that, it's attorney by law. Any real estate closing, any residential closing, everybody has to have an attorney. You can't just go to a title company. And it's really kind of a game changer in that. That's why sometimes information from other parts, not now, because there's so much information out there and very little of it is about that.
Yeah.
But back then, you really had to kind of speak to people in the market. And, it was a different world then too, Dan. It's different now. People are willing to share. They're all more open. They see the value of that. Back then, nobody would tell you anything,
Right.
I know it's a general statement, but it was just a different kind of culture. Oh, I'm a real estate investment. You'll figure it out. They throw vague things at you like that,
Yeah.
So it was kind of tough. And then, I had a career and I was working full time and I was working a lot, 60 hours a week. And so it just kind of petered off. But I always, someone would always come around and I'd go out and make some offers and, it just wouldn't pan out because I wasn't investing the time,
Well, let me ask you about that. Cause so you were talking about, I really like, you're sort of painting that picture of you are standing on the subway in the suit. And it reminded me so much of like when I got out of college, I commuted, I live in Connecticut. So I commuted into the city to apply for a job. And like, I was wearing a suit my dad bought me. It was like 2 sizes too big. And I was like standing on the subway platform and just being like, I don't know. This is actually what I want to do. You know what I mean? But it's like, so you're doing like 2 years, you've got a career, right? You're doing your stuff, but you made the decision, like you said, to burn the boats and get into real estate investing. And I think for a lot of people, even though they hate their job, they are still having that debate in their head because it's a big jump. right? So what motivated you to actually do that and make that jump? What did you put in place before you went full time? And then like what made you actually pull that trigger and say like, yes, I'm this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do the waiting on the subway platform every day. I'm going to do real estate investing instead.
Like I said, it was like like anything sometimes, right? It's a confluence of a few things, right? So number one, I hated it so much, right? Number two, I just had my second son. My older guy was maybe like 4. And it was like, I worked a lot, and I didn't see him. And it always bothered me. And it always bothered my wife, right? And now I had a second son. It was like going to be the repeat thing. So that was that was the number one thing. Number two, what happens? You get older, right? When you're younger, you're like, there's always tomorrow. And like, oh, I'll do it then. I had gotten older now. And now I was so tired of working so hard and struggling and working so many hours and being away from my family. It meant more to me now. It's like, I'm running out of time here to try to fix this, right? Because otherwise, I'm just going to play this thing out and I'm just going to, work hard till the end and then just get a little bit of something. And, there's less runway now, right? I'm farther down the runway. So it also became that issue. I guess that's what pushed me. And the fact that I had worked so hard for other employers. And even, that job was on the platform. That was a second job I had actually after law enforcement. But the prior job for that, I worked for a small business as a sales guy. And I made them a lot of money and I expanded their business a lot. And then when I got to that second job over 2 years, same thing. I took over a unit and I expanded their business. We hired a lot again. And I'm like, wow, I've been killing myself for a long time for other people, right? And I'm proud of that. I was a good employee. I was a trusted person. People were like, man, I got to get the job done for you, which is, of course, a good feeling, right?
Yeah.
Right. So in that way, that's who I am. And that's who my parents raised. And that's how they are. But I was just like, you know what? When you're younger, and even when I was in the police department, I moved up through the ranks and I would always get promotions. And I was a single guy for a long time. So I always felt like I had a lot of money. But then you know the deal, Dan, right? You get married, you have a couple of kids. And then all of a sudden, you don't feel like you're wealthy anymore,
Oh, no, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm not complaining. I have, a pension and I'm comfortable, but I wanted more. And having children made me want to have more for my children. And that made me say, you know what? It's not just going to happen. I'm just not going to hit the lottery one day. I got to buckle down here now and make a move, or I'm never going to want those things that I really wanted out of life. And so that kind of all came together, being a miserable job, my children, and then just me realizing time is not infinite here. And I was just like, you know what? I'm out. And I pulled the plug. And I was pretty set up for it. I'd had a contract with the place I was at. I knew they were looking to bring somebody else in above me. And so I negotiated a nice little severance package. And that kind of was my seed money. And, people take much bigger risks in real estate. I had pension and healthcare from being in the police department. So it's not like I was really laying it out there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We were always going to have that. But it was a definite drop in income, and I was going to have to make it up, and I was going to have to make it up quick. And that's basically how I am where I am now.
Are you an investor who wants to dominate your local market? Do you want more leads and deals online? Then download your copy of the Motivated Seller Blueprint, absolutely free, at www.adwordsnerds.com/gift. What are you waiting for? Go to www.adwordsnerds.com/gift right now to get your copy of the Motivated Seller Blueprint.
So when you made that jump, what were the deal structures that you were doing? Did you get into wholesaling? Did you jump right into flipping? Like, what was the model when you got started? And what's your model right now?
Right. So like anyone kind of starting out, back then, this is 4 years ago, I'd had a two-family house, which I had ended up selling with my brother in 2009. The first thing I said, I got to buy a rental. So I took some money I had, I borrowed some money from my folks. I went out and I bought a rental. and did like $120,000 renovation. I spent like 10 months doing that. And as I've said a couple of times, I get a little long in the tooth, as they say. I realized, because I've always had kind of done construction on the side, worked on houses I've lived in. I used to kind of enjoy that work. Now I was like, wow, I just really killed myself over 10 months physically doing work. This is not the answer. You know, I got the house rented. It's a good rental property. I still have it now. It cash flows very nicely. And I'm like, well, I can't do this, you know, because I'll kill myself over 20 years and maybe get 5 or 6 properties. And this is not the answer. So then I was like, okay, you know, let me look at flipping houses. And I kind of started right now we have the internet, right? And I start sitting up late at night, you know, 2-3 hours reading articles, Bigger Pockets, and looking at training programs, and kind of got into this bank-owned properties, you know, because back then you could still buy bank-owned properties and there was enough of a margin. So the first house I bought was a bank-owned property. I went on Craigslist and I found a guy's ad who was a realtor. And he's like, I only work with investors. I can get you discounted properties in Long Island. And I called him up and he had a bunch of investors, and I bought my first house on an auction site, but he bid for me. I think it was Hubzu, maybe one of those auction sites. And I actually bought it Christmas morning. Because the auction, yeah. So like my kids were opening presents. I'm like, I'm going to go get a little bit more coffee. And I'm going on my phone and I'm seeing where the bid is, you know. And I'm like, oh, I got to go to the bathroom. I'm in the bathroom.
Sneaky about it. That's my favorite part of it. You're like, oh, let me go check on the, you know, like the toast or whatever. And you're like, you know, frantically checking your phone or whatever.
Checking to see if my bid goes through. And it did. And I got that first property. And, you know, it's interesting how you learn very quickly, right? Like I thought the business was you buy a house, you fix it up yourself. And that's where the margin is, right? And you work on the house. I used all my own cash to buy the house and to renovate it, which was good because I didn't get myself in trouble with a loan, like a hard money loan and all of that. I did that later on. And then I spent a lot of time working on the house myself. I probably did 50 or 60% of the work, you know, and I sold it and I made like $32,000. And to me, of course, when you go into your first one, you're like, I just want to do it to learn the process, you know, and I did. And all my numbers were wrong. And I got bailed out basically by the fact, I guess part of it was a bailout. I did a nice job on the house, so it was in demand. But the market was also ascending here in Long Island. It was going up.
Right.
And that kind of bailed me out. I sold as it timed out. I bought it Christmas. I ended up selling it like in May. So I'm at the peak of the market. And I got more than I thought I was going to. If I got what I originally planned on getting, I would have broke even. But because I did well on it, the kind of market bailed me out. I learned, of course, a ton of lessons. And then the big lesson being, you can't waste your time working on these houses. That's not how you become a millionaire.
Well, so break that down a little bit. Because I think that, you know, there's a significant number of people who are going to be listening to this who are, if not, you know, maybe not like looking to do their first deal, but they're maybe like 1 or 2 deals in, right? And I think it can take a while for those lessons to really sink in, right? So when you say, right, you know, you learned you can't be spending your time doing all the work. That's not where the margin is. I think a lot of people are thinking like, well, no, that's how I'm going to save money, right? Like I'm going to do everything myself. That's how I'm going to build in the margin. So explain that lesson to the newer investor out there that's thinking like, okay, I'm going to buy this property. I'm going to go out. I'm going to do all that work myself.
Okay. Yeah. And so what ends up happening while you're doing that, right, is I guess if you want to do 1 house a year or 2 houses a year, like part-time, I can tell you, you could still do that and make money, but really just buy the house cheaper and enjoy your life, right? Because part of what that is you're working a lot of hours. And if you kind of got another job, right, like you're trying to get into it, now you're giving up your weekends. Maybe you take some vacation and you work on the house, right? That's the whole point of this, right? It's about making money. But to me, the whole point of it is also, it's about freedom, right? Freeing up your time, right? And that, I didn't care about time as much when I was single, but when I got married and had kids now time is more important to me because I want to spend time with my family. I was a bit of a workaholic, so it was less important. So I guess that's number one. Maybe you'll save a little bit of money, but you're also going to be spending a lot of time. And what's the value of your time? I'll tell you that a mentor of mine a few years ago, a paid coach, he once said to me, you know, what do you want to make? I had lower aspirations back then. So I think I said, I want to make $380,000 a year. He goes, okay, Joe. And he took his phone out, and I'm doing it right now. I have my phone out. And he typed in 380 in his calculator. He said, the average person works 2,080 hours a year, right? That's a 40-hour work week, 2 weeks vacation, right?
Mm.
So he said, okay, so you want to make 380, right? You're telling me, as he called it, you're still swinging a hammer, right? Because I thought I was winning by swinging a hammer. He said, okay, well, you need to make, and I just did the math here, it's $183 an hour. So you multiply that by 8, you basically need to be making $1,500 a day if you want to make $380,000 a year. So he said, how much could you hire a guy to go swing a hammer at one of your properties? I said, I don't know, $225 a day. He goes, okay, look at that. He goes, you're never getting to your goal. He says, if you take 225 and you multiply it by 2080, that's nowhere near the $380,000 you want to make, and that was kind of a very important lesson to me. It's like, okay, man, you really have to think ahead and you have to do some planning here. If you have a goal to make that, you're clearly not going to make it. And that was it. I'm a bit of a control freak. So, I have to break free of kind of my old habits. You got to really delegate and have people do things. One of the things I do now, I have a spreadsheet on every project. And I also put my daily number of what the property costs me to carry. I think that's a real important thing for anybody who's doing rehabs. You have to know what that property costs you on a daily basis and make decisions based on that daily number. So I'm sitting in front of one of my properties right now. I know what it is. It's $86 a day. This house cost me with the loan, insurance, utilities, everything that goes in. Just if I don't do any work here, it costs me $86 a day. So if I get a quote from a painter for $2,000 and he can start tomorrow, right? And then I get a quote from another painter and he'll do it for $1,500, but he can't start for 8 days. See, I need to know what my daily burn rate is, right? Because I'm going with $2,000 a guy day tomorrow because I'll save $300 and something. And then you make decisions based on that. You start to value your time a lot more. I had a contractor who I used to have a very good contractor who used to do the whole house for you. He worked for a lot of investors. He doesn't do it anymore. And it was great because you'd literally go to the closing. He'd take the house over. You'd go there. You give him a couple of checks at the end. You get your check. You pay him. You go to the closing. And it was very, very good. And he saw me once. I'm loading 5 pieces, and I'm a real estate investor, right? I'm loading 5 pieces of sheetrock in the back of my pickup truck, right? A handful of tile and a thing of joint compound. Total value of about $55. He's like, where are you going? I'm like, I'm going to Home Depot. I'm going to return his stuff. He goes, just throw it in the dumpster. I go, I can't do that. That's wasting money, And I'm I'm an environmentalist. I have solar power on my roof, and I really don't like to be wasteful. Right. And I just said, nah. And I just saw him shaking his head. And he does way better than I do. But he said, what are you doing with your time? He goes, you're going to spend 3 hours to get $60. And we're back to what am I valuing myself at $20 an hour?
Yeah. I think that is a huge, huge lesson. It's a huge lesson that I think is really hard. I think if you are not in the business of business, it's really hard to understand that. It's funny, it's totally different context, but it reminds me of literally last night, I'm talking to my wife, and it's me and a friend, we were going to go out see a movie. And I'm like, oh, he wants to go out Sunday, but I don't know if the movies that we want to see is playing Sunday, right? So it's I have to find a theater where it's playing. And I literally just called, I have a virtual assistant. I just called the virtual assistant. I was like, hey, can you just Google around and find a place, blah, 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 blah. I just sent him a voice message, right? Just find a place for me, let me know where it is, and then text my friend and let him know. And my wife was right next to me and she's like, I can't believe you did that because you could just Google it. And I'm like, yeah, but then I have to think about it. I have to think about it and do it. And it's only going to take me 10 minutes, but it's 10 minutes. And, it's I know what I can make per hour. And this is not worth 10 minutes of my time. You know what I mean? It's just
exactly.
Yeah. I think it's such a huge mindset shift for most people that I think a lot of people never really figure it out. And I love that you have, breaking it down to what that property costs you per day is, I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think that's great.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, and like just one last thing is like I have a guy, like a full-time employee, does a lot of kind of my jack of all trades. And he does a lot of the work on the sites and he's there. And when contractors are coming in and out, like I have at that 2-family house, I have like a commercial garage and I got a ton of tools because every house I flip, there's always tools in the garage, right? And I always take them back, and it's like, my guy's always trying to throw them out. I'm like, oh, no, because it's tough to break through your old habits. You know what I'm saying? I grew up, my parents had to wash the money and that's who I am. And it'll save you in the long run. But it's years and years of that training. You have to fight to get away from it because it's not how you make money out here. You have to learn how to make money, and you see the people doing it. You talk to people who are doing it, and you learn that. And so he had called me a couple of weeks ago and was like, "Hey, I got to go back to the garage. We need a pump jack over here to do this job." And I'm like, "Wow, you're going to waste 2 hours going back to the garage and finding that thing and going back out there." I said, "It's like a $50 item." I said, "Go to Home Depot." I go, "There's one like 4 minutes from you, and just go buy one." He's like, "It's so wasteful." I said, "Well, I'll tell you a little trick. If you feel that bad about it, I won't care if you go back and return it." I go, "Jack up what you got to jack. You go right ahead and return it. I'll take the $50 back." But right there, that's one of those $86 decisions, right? It doesn't pay. Keep going. You got to keep these things moving. I guess part of what I'm saying, this is the next level of it. Every time I do a rehab, I get them done quicker. I get better at lining up things. I'm 2 weeks ahead of the plumber rather than calling them 3 days and finding out I got to wait a week. You need to be way ahead of these. What I'll also tell you too is don't argue with a licensed contract. If you have a good one, a good electrician, a good licensed plumber, a good siding and window guy, don't argue with them over $200. If it's a $9,800 job and you're like, "Oh, so I'm going to get it for $9,000. Oh, I'll do it for $9,000. What'll happen is you move down their list of priorities, right? And contractors have plenty of work here in Long Island.
Yeah.
So what happens is if you don't nickel and dime them, because they do need to make a living. I mean, I have to align that also with my own price structure, but I've got pretty good at understanding it. It makes it a lot easier when you get a house cheaper. Then you don't have to sweat the details as much. So what ends up happening is when you don't nickel and dime them, A, and B, when you pay them immediately and your checks don't bounce, then guess what? If you're calling them and 2 other house flippers are calling them, you're right up at the top, which means whenever I call my subs, they'll show up here. They're like, "Yeah, I had another couple of things. I pushed them back to get over here and do this for you." And at $86 a day, right? You fight, right? If they push you 5 days back because you're squabbling with them over $200, right? The key is, and especially when you start taking, private money or hard money loans, that number gets bigger, right? It's always ticking out there. It's always ticking. And so that would be my other piece of advice.
That value in that relationship with that contractor over time is worth so much more to you than that $200 you're going to save by nickel and diming, right?
Right. Like, I'm that guy that one of the things I do is like I'll order appliances and I'll go back before Lowe's and Home Depot and this other kind of appliance outfit here in Long Island. It's pretty big on their websites. And it's like, it's a psychological thing. It's like, I got to get this under $2,000, right? And I used to be like, oh, I can save $13 on this dishwasher. And it's like, oh my God. Like I look back at those times now and I'm like, what was I doing? You get kind of caught up in that old habits, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, man, I just wasted 3 hours when I could have been sitting with my kids on the couch or, playing Madden with them or whatever. I wasted it buying appliances and I saved $42, So, there's a lot of ways. Sometimes you got to let it go. I'm getting a good number. That's fine. Time to move on. If I can make $40,000 and squeeze every dollar, or I can make 37.5 and not waste 50 hours on nonsense and calling more contractors than I need to, then that's a poor use of your time. So I'm just kind of reiterating the point that too about the contractors. They need to make a living. And if you have a good one, pay them right away. Don't squabble over a few bucks. I mean, you always got to watch the numbers. That's another thing that will keep your projects moving very quickly. And you got to be in and out of them. In New York, I mean, you got to have your rehabs done 10, 12 weeks. And because it's a lengthy process to sell them. Because of the attorneys, from the time you start, you get an accepted offer. By the time you're out of these, is another 10 to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
With mortgage, appraisal, lawyers in, out, setting closings. So you really got to have the thing on the market no later than 3 months. And then you got to have it sold at the 6-month point and gone, because it starts to go the other way on you very quickly.
So, I mean, I could literally just keep talking about this because I think I love your approach to this, but I gotta cut it short because we're coming up on another call that I got to do. So I said this before, but like you're buying houses in Long Island right now. People can learn a little bit more about your business at WeBuyHousesFastLongIsland.com. And I would just say, take a minute and like look up what Joe's doing online. I think you're doing some really good stuff. And we didn't even get into your website and stuff, but I think your website is great. I think you did a great job of personalizing that. And I think people should definitely go check that out. Again, that's WeBuyHousesFastLongIsland.com. Joe, thank you so much, man. This was really, really fascinating. And I absolutely love this. And I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem, Dan. Thanks a lot, man.
All right. Cheers, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
You got it. Bye.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.